Hey there, welcome to the Bronx Buzz. This is BronxNet's program where we talk to reporters and writers and editors and journalists, all different people who are putting stuff out in the Bronx. And under that definition, it also includes people like artists or authors. And this evening, in our second segment, we have one of the Bronx's premier artists who's going to come on the show and talk about his latest gallery exhibition that is available to you. But right now, to start the program, we're going to talk to a reporter for Politics New York. He covers city and state government. It's my pleasure to welcome Ethan Stark Miller to the program. Nice to have you with us, sir.
Hey, Gary. Thanks so much for having me.
As I mentioned to you, I've been reading what you've been writing for a while, and you really are, in my mind, a wonderful, thorough reporter, kind of person we need covering issues in the Bronx and beyond. Little background for you so people get to meet who you are. What got you into journalism? When did you get started? What was your interest? Let's get a little background.
Yeah, so I mean, it wasn't the most, it wasn't like working at a school paper kind of path. Like I came to it in kind of a roundabout way. I've always been kind of into storytelling, was very into it in high school. I kind of did like these film programs, made my own movies, and then also was very into politics. So I kind of saw like the marriage between those two things as journalism and during college got into that.
And where did you go to school?
I went to a
We
school called
all want to know. What school?
it's the $1,000,000 question. I went to a school called Wheaton College, very
Wheaton.
small school in Massachusetts, not too far from Providence, Rhode
Is
Island.
that where you grew up in Massachusetts?
No, I grew up here in the city. I grew up in Brooklyn.
Ah, there you go. Well, you're forgiven for crossing borough lines. That's okay. Um, but it kind of like was one of these things that you gravitated to it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
what inspires you to do the work now, especially covering politics as you do for Politics New York, which is part of the Schnepp's family of papers.
Yes. Yeah, it's part of the um and yeah, I mean, politics, I think what on the baseline inspired me is just this is all politics is everything. It's like the issues that affect everyone every day. Whether that's politics or policy, I guess, is up for debate. But the people who we're putting in power, that's very important. And something that everyone needs to know about. And I think it was like during the 2008 election when I first kind of became interested in politics. And actually, it was my parents watching like a lot of MSNBC that like got me into it. Which now I wouldn't exactly say that's what I watch these days, but like that was kind of the inciting moment.
And listen, I can relate to what you're saying about wanting. I mean, I always say I'm the medium through which all that information flows, and of course, you using a slightly different medium, using print. Let's talk about some stuff that you've been writing about. One of them is redistricting, which, frankly, for the everyday New Yorker, gets very complicated. There's congressional lines, there's state lines, which breaks down to the Senate and the Assembly, and now, of course, the City Council redistricting is happening right in front of our eyes. Let's talk about the congressional lines. I'll just give you a little background, which I'm sure you know. Richie Torres is going to be covering Riverdale, which is a bit of a stretch. Jamal Bowman, assuming that these guys win, will not be covering that large swath of the West Bronx anymore, and just only has a little bit of the Bronx. AOC's district is going to cover more of the East Bronx, which may not please so many of the moderate Democrats and Republicans who live in that part of the Bronx. You've been writing about Manhattan with Nadler and Maloney in the 10th congressional district with de Blasio. This is where I'm going. Do you think this was done properly, and that now, even though there are some things going on, we're at a good place right now?
Well, the first iteration of maps, which were drawn by the supermajority Democrat state legislature, those were found by the state's highest court to be the New York State Court of Appeals to be gerrymandered, basically, beyond recognition to
Favor Democrats, yeah.
yeah, to advantage Democrats. There's a district. in the south part of the city, southern Brooklyn, Staten Island, that they drew to include more liberal neighborhoods in Brooklyn to get Nicole Malliotakis,
Right.
well, presumably to get Nicole Malliotakis,
Yes.
the conservative congresswoman there, out of office. Um, so, I mean, it seems like what they ultimately ended up with, these new maps, which were drawn by an independent expert appointed by an upstate judge, it seems like these are more fair. They even the odds for Republicans in some places. Malliotakis now has a good chance of recapturing her seat. And it's created these kind of competitive dynamics between some longstanding Democrats. You have, like you said, Nadler and Maloney.
A fascinating, competition there.
Yeah, those two have been in
You
Congress for decades.
you know what strikes me, which really is kind of interesting, is there are states all over this country that do this from the other side on a routine basis to X out, people, from voting or, kind of creating Republican districts. And those court systems don't intercede, and they get away with it. In New York, fairly or unfairly, here it gets gerrymandered, and of course, we'd like to think maybe there's a greater sense of justice. How do you see the state lines now? The Senate lines, and I bring up the congressional and the state Senate because that's what's coming up in the August primary. The Gustavo Rivera Miguelina Camilo race in the 33rd is fascinating, as is the one in the 34th with Christian Amato, Natalia Fernandez, and James Gisandi. Um, how do you see it? I'll just throw it open. Do you want to weigh in? How do you see any of those playing out?
Yeah, I mean, the Rivera race is really interesting because, he's an incumbent. He's been in the Senate for 10 years. He originally came into the Senate with the party's blessing and their backing and has held on to it for a long time. But, according to reporting from the Bronx Times, and kind of obviously publicly, he was backing Jessica Wolford, who was running against Assembly Member Jeffrey Dinowitz in the Riverdale district. And then also you had Jonathan Soto. He was backing him, who was running against Michael
Michael
Benedetto.
Benedetto. You know what's interesting about all that is that here's somebody, as you said, who is in essence a party regular, and now there's a less familiar name, Miguelina Camilo, that's being backed by the Benjamin Franklin Club, et cetera, et cetera. Do you see that? And yet he's a well-heeled, so to speak, incumbent. Do you see her being able to defeat him, even with the new resources that she has? Maybe she can.
Yeah, maybe she can. I mean, name recognition always, that's a pretty powerful thing. And
Even though the district extends to new neighborhoods.
right. That's true. Yeah. No, there's definitely a lot of dynamics at work there. And that, yeah, maybe the district extending the new neighborhoods gives her a good shot. And
Mhm,
the party has a lot of resources, like you said. And
mhm.
political clubs like the Ben Franklin Club also have a lot of resources. The Dinowitzes are closely tied to both of those, and they have a lot of sway in the Riverdale area. They have a lot of name recognition. So that could tilt things in her favor.
It's a fascinating, if you're interested in the horse race, so to speak, it's rather fascinating. What it also sets up, and you've written about this, is the whole idea of the progressive movement, which did not do well in the assembly primary. Um, how do you see it? This is what strikes me, and you've covered in Riverdale plenty, is that Jeff Dinowitz is 100% on women's rights and 100% on guns, gun control, et cetera, et cetera. He wrote the eviction moratorium law. But right now, progressives don't see him as a progressive, and there's a whole and he frankly is fighting back in name, frankly. How do you see the progressive movement? Was that a bellwether of what's to come? What happened with the assembly, or do you think maybe there's still some life there and they'll be able to defeat incumbents?
Well, if you listen to the New York Working Families Party, who I spoke to for a
Yes,
story that I did on this,
right.
they'll say turnout was low in that election, and it's not a bellwether. This is not the last gasp of the movement that started with AOC back in 2018. It was just
Mhm.
like a hiccup. And I was told the August election could have higher turnout, although I don't see how that could happen during a second election in the same year, and there's no statewide races, and people will be on vacation. Um,
In my mind, that's a mess. It's discouraging for voters rather than encouraging for voters.
yeah,
And that will also, kind of determine how the whole thing plays. Um, just, the last thing, we didn't really get a chance to touch on it, and frankly, I haven't had a chance to analyze it. We'll be doing a show on Bronx Talk, about the city council, redistricting. The first draft is out. What are your thoughts? What are the is there anything, eye-opening there that makes you say, "Gee, this is gonna be an interesting competition."
the main thing that jumped out to me and other people in like the political class, I guess, is there was this district down in Brooklyn that was created to be a majority Asian district. But it's put a couple of council members into the same district, and they're possibly going to have to compete with each other if these are the maps that are
That
adopted.
ultimately get through.
Yeah, and
So
that's
that
Justin Brannan, the finance chair, and Alexa Aviles, she's a first term younger progressive.
Right. Did you see anything in the Bronx that of interest? As I said, I have not had a chance to see them, but, anything in the Bronx that raises your eyes, or is it mostly gonna be essentially the same
It
as what
mostly
we've
looked the
got now?
same to me.
Okay.
I didn't see
I
too
we
many.
accept that.
Yeah, maybe that's a good thing. I don't. Yeah, it depends who you ask.
I will, we'll both, not, weigh in on that, concept there right now. Anyway, Ethan Stark Miller, he covers city and state government for Politics New York. Nice to have you with us for the first time, and I'm pretty sure that we're gonna invite you to make a second and third time as well.
All right, thank you so much, Gary. Thanks
Thank
for having
you.
me on.
Folks, we'll take a short break. When we come back, as I mentioned, the aforementioned, great Bronx artist, Daniel Haubin, will join us and show us some of his great artwork, and we'll do that, right after we take a break. Don't go away.